This is Kiana Park from SpyPalm Partners. Welcome to webinar number 26 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series sponsored by Federal Highway Administration and AASHTO. Today's webinar is the first in a four-part series addressing elements of a transportation asset management plan. The first one today is on asset inventory, condition, target setting, and 10-year projections. Basically, what you'll hear today are 4 states and the experiences they're going through as they develop their TAMPs. Our next webinar will address how agencies are dealing with risk management as they build their TAMPs, and it'll be on Wednesday, July 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information on this webinar series, please visit TAM-portal.com. That's TAM-portal.com. From there, click TAM event in the main menu and register for any webinar. You'll also find archives of all the previous webinars and links to the videos and slides from today's webinar that will be posted after the webinar today. If you have suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters today during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar Q&A feature. We'll answer all questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar in the order they come in. Now I'm going to turn it over to Max Groff from the Federal Highway Administration for a brief introduction of today's topic.
Thanks. My name is Max Grog, and I am with the Federal Highway's Office of Asset Management, Pavement, and Construction. And Federal Highway, in cooperation with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management, is very pleased to sponsor this webinar series. These webinars are a great way to bring people together around a series of important topics and allow people to connect within the asset management community. As those of you who are on the line today know, states are required to prepare an asset management plan for the NHS pavement and bridges, and states may optionally include more assets and or other measures besides those required, and that's a topic that we're going to hear more about today. So these plans need to address a 10-year period. They need to determine performance targets that corresponds to agency goals and objectives as outlined in the 23 USC 150. So today we're going to hear 4 perspectives on these subjects from Iowa, Maryland, California, and Nebraska on what this looks like in practice as states develop their first asset management plan and reflect on these requirements. So in support of this effort, Federal Highway is encouraging the use of the tools and resources that are available, and there are many useful NHI courses. I would refer you to Federal Highway's website on asset management that you see here at the bottom of the page, where there are a lot of resources, reports, TAMPs that states have completed that are available for you to download and review. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Yana, and we'll go through the overview of today's webinar.
Oops, I was on mute. Thanks, Max. Today's presentation includes 4 perspectives on TAMP development focusing on asset inventory, condition, target setting, and 10-year projections. Each of our presenters is helping to have their agencies build their TAMPs. We'll hear about their challenges and opportunities, and also it builds on many years, decades of hard work to strengthen TAM processes and capabilities. Perhaps most notably, those related to asset inventory and condition data collection and management. I want to thank all of the presenters in advance for their willingness to share with us their work in progress in these areas. And I think one of the things that's exciting about this 4-part series is we're bringing to the table many states that are really in the midst of building their TAMP, and they're going to be sharing their work in progress. All right, so now for this webinar, our primary learning objectives are building working knowledge of key concepts and definitions relevant to TAM inventory condition targets and performance projections, understanding specific approaches to bringing these elements together in the process of developing a TAMP that meets federal requirements, beginning to apply the knowledge in order to answer how can agencies identify and address gaps in asset inventory and condition data, how can states develop appropriate targets based on the data available and institutional constraints, what are the key lessons learned for agencies seeking to develop an asset management plan that meets federal requirements? And of course, as in all of our webinars, share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. We have a full agenda today, so I'm going to make a few comments before handing it over to our first presenter. As I said earlier, we'll have a Q&A at the end, so as you have questions, please submit them using the webinar Q&A feature in the menu bar at any time during the presentation. For those of you connecting from your desktop computer, you can download the slides now from the webinar handouts control panel, and we'll make the slides and video available after today's webinar at tamportal.com. I think there is a change in one of the presentations that is not in the download you have now, so you may want to download the updated slide deck after the presentation. Our first speaker today is Matt Halbrick from Iowa DOT. Matt's the Transportation Asset Management Administrator at Iowa DOT. He manages the development of their TAMP and is heavily involved with TAM governance and implementation for the department. Matt is a member of the TRB TAM committee, which is ABC 40, and has been involved in several NCHRP projects, as well as the planning committees for national TAM and performance management conferences. Matt's background is in data analytics and market research, and just last week he picked up a master's degree in business analytics to add his collection of degrees he already has, including an MBA and a BS in statistics. And now I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Yana. Just have a few slides to go through here today, give you an overview of kind of where we've been in Iowa and where we are hoping to go. And the title of our presentation is Asset Inventory, Condition, and Investment. So I'll start by just giving a little bit of background on the inventory and condition aspects. Those are kind of the major building blocks for any analysis that we're going to do. And so, you know, they're built on types of data, including pavement data. We've had automated distress collection here in Iowa since the late 90s. So rich history of very detailed pavement data that we can use to build our models. Of course, like every state, we've got our bridge inspection data through the NBIS process. Long history also of collecting our video log, so we can have the ability to know what our system has looked like pretty much every year, and going back in time to at least the 90s, if not before. I know somewhere in our archives we have a collection of these big laser discs that have video log on them, so we can go back quite a ways if we want to. We've also, in like a lot of other states, have been doing some project level mobile LiDAR, mostly on kind of spot areas when we have a particular project we need to do, but we're looking at trying to bring all of that data together so that we have it for design purposes. We're not at the state that you know, maybe somebody like Utah is at to have statewide mobile LiDAR, but you know, we're certainly looking at mechanisms like that to collect asset inventory statewide. Currently, what we're working on is really more of a video log based or video based asset extraction. I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. We're also doing field data collection, and really that should say field data inspection. We're using tablets to collect condition information out there to give us a better sense of condition of all of our features, culverts, barriers, lighting, signs, etc. We have an ongoing e-construction initiative, which we hope will produce a lot of data for our asset management systems about what is being built. Now, of course, that's a kind of an exciting frontier that I think a lot of people are interested in learning more about, kind of the whole civil integrated management model and sort of how can we harvest asset data. And I think that's going to be an important source of information for us in the future. But we also recognize that we only work on a very small part of our system every year. So even if we have the detailed plan data, as we start to get that, that's going to still only cover parts of our system, at least in the near term. We've had in the past statewide contracts to collect vertical clearance data because we've had issues of trying to make sure that we have the correct vertical clearance information. And then we are also very fortunate that we've had a great focus on our all public roads LRS, and we've got a crack team that maintains that LRS, and we've had a lot of success in being able to have a single unified LRS, not just for our primary network that the DOT manages, but for all public roads in the state. As I kind of alluded to a second ago, we've had a little bit of an evolution in our data collection. We now have a single vendor that doing the video log, pavement condition, and asset inventory. Previously, the video log was kind of an in-house effort using a vehicle that we purchased, and the pavement condition was collected through contract. Now that's all kind of done in under one contract to deliver us with both the video log and the pavement condition information. We're doing the interstate every year, the rest of the system, and when I say the rest of the system, I'm including all the county and city streets. We collect about 40,000 paved miles every year, or excuse me, every 2 years. And then we're also working with the vendor to determine how we're going to extract asset inventory information, the locations of our assets from that information as we, or from our video log as we have received that. We've also been very successful with our implementation of our Esri Roads and Highways system, which we started in 2016 and finished in very quick order. We are now able to leverage the roads and highways infrastructure, and find that to be a vast improvement over our previous LRS, and it's really enabling us to do some exciting things with that asset data and provide some great products back to our users. And as I mentioned, we're using iPads with the Esri Collector software suite to collect the condition of information of assets. So from video log you can get where things are and sort of what they are, but not so much about their condition state. How good is that sign, or how good is that guardrail, and those are the kinds of things that we really need to have eyes on, and these tablet technologies have given us a lot of great information about. Now I can sit at my desk and pull up a map that shows where all the culverts that are in very poor condition are, which is not something we could do even just a couple years ago. That was very locally held information. And now we can paint a much better picture of what the needs are related to those various features that previously were managed at the local level. And then the other thing that we're doing with data is trying to support the local agencies. We've got a pretty dense road network in Iowa because of how the state was developed and a lot of farmland, and we have over 75,000 miles of gravel roads out there, and those don't belong to the state DOT, but we want to help local agencies in managing assets like that are not really in our wheelhouse, but are definitely things that affect how they're able to invest in the transportation network and provide them with tools and help to better manage those assets in the future. So all of this data and this information is really critical to help us build a program. And when I talk about a program, I'm talking about our capital program, basically the major investments that we make in everything from new alignment roadways all the way down to contract maintenance is all handled through our capital program in one way or another. And the primary focus really of our capital program is on our pavement and bridge investments. That's really where we make the lion's share of our investment today in terms of the dollars going to those asset classes or driving our investments. And so we use some tools like TAMs from Dayton for our pavement modeling, and we use NBI Optimizer from Infrastructure Data Solutions to model our bridges. And those tools are very helpful for us to project what the needs are going to be based on the condition and asset inventory information that we have. And that information really flows to some key stakeholders. Obviously, our management at the DOT here. We're also a state that has a Transportation Commission that approves our capital program, and the Transportation Commission is a key stakeholder as well. And then, of course, our legislature, and helping them better understand the funds that have been allocated to transportation in Iowa. We were fortunate a few years ago to get a fuel tax increase, and I know many states have been kind of looking at fuel tax increases or have received fuel tax increases over the last couple of years, and legislators certainly want to know where those funds are going and make sure that they're being invested wisely. And just as an aside, I'll mention our capital program is a 5-year program, and then we always show an additional 5 years for planning purposes. So I'll give you a flavor of some of the information that we have shown our Transportation Commission to try to help them understand the investment that we need to make on the stewardship side. So we'll start by looking at a couple of the slides that we developed related to bridge investment. And for one thing, we started by saying, okay, what if we kind of have the status quo budget? So we've been investing probably on the order of about $70 million a year in our bridge program. And you know, these numbers are just, you know, to give you a kind of a framework. But what we said is we asked our bridge folks with their NBI Optimizer tool to say, okay, so if we continue to invest at that level, can you forecast out to 2027, what are we going to be looking at in terms of bridge condition? What percentage of our bridges are going to be what we classify as good, and what percentage are going to be poor? And so they put together a chart like this using that tool, and we're able to, you know, quickly identify, you know, that there will be a decrease in condition. First of all, you can see the green bars going down over time. Far fewer bridges, about half the bridges that are currently in good condition will no longer be in good condition in 2027. And we have a tenfold, more than tenfold increase in the number of poor bridges. So, you know, this was some important information to kind of help our commission get a better idea of what the current level of investment will result in. And, you know, what we've said is, in terms of target setting, let's try to leave things at least as good as they are today. You know, we don't want to get into, you know, what specific target should we be setting, but more sort of what kind of, if we can leave things at least as good as they are today in the future, that's probably a win. So we've also put together charts like this that show what the actual need is. And so the orange bars here are what's actually programmed on our non-interstate bridges, or programmed or projected to be programmed, versus the blue bars are showing our optimized program, how it would invest in order to maintain status quo. And this says that, you know, today we're spending $70 million a year, that we need $189 million a year in order to maintain status quo. So that's definitely important information for our commission. In terms of pavement, similarly, we tried to give an idea of the inventory. So this chart we threw together to just show, okay, when were all the miles of pavement out there originally constructed, and how many overlays have they had? And, you know, looking at a chart like this, you can see that there's a huge spread. We have quite a few pavements that were originally constructed in the 20s and 30s that, you know, within the next, you know, we're talking octogenarian pavements within the time frame of our program, and, you know, there may be some real needs out there that we need to be addressing through some pavement replacements or other heavier types of rehabs. But we also want to maintain that bubble on the right end of the chart of newer pavements and make sure that they're being maintained in good condition, so that we can afford to make those heavier investments in the rehabs on the pavements that are beyond their useful life. So to this end, we had the pavement folks run some different DTIMS analysis, and this shows some, basically, if we have our status quo budget, what would we look like system condition-wise out in the future. So the little gray bars at the bottom of the chart show the dollar investment level, and that's indexed to the right axis on the chart. And then the lines represent the trend for poor, good, and fair condition, is indicated by the colors orange, yellow, or green. And so you can see and this was very clear to show to our stakeholders that we're going to see amendments and a decrease in good condition pavements, and is that what we really want to pass on to future generations, and what kind of investment level would we need to kind of flatten that out. So we ran a 200% scenario. Said, well, okay, if we basically invested about double what we are today, looks like we could probably hold things more or less where they are today. That's maybe a little decrease in the poor, but that's kind of this, let's say, status quo condition-wise. So that's one way to look at it. But then we also have the issue that in the first 5 years of the program, our budgets are a lot more inflexible. We've kind of committed to a lot of projects, and we don't have the ability to move things around. So let's say that we weren't able to actually increase the investment in those first 5 years. How much additional funding would be needed in order to catch up back a bit of the entire time frame? And this shows that we would have to invest a total of $2.76 billion, or more than $115 million more than what we would do in just the straight 200% scenario to get there. So this is just, again, framing information to help guide or inform some of the decision making happening in terms of where we need to make investments in our network. We also provided some contextual information regarding, for example, the purchasing power and kind of how that's trended versus like the consumer price index, for example, and just to give some sort of feel for how prices our purchasing power has eroded. We also did analysis where we looked at the 10-year program and what proportion of the program is being invested in stewardship or rehabilitation programs versus in sort of new construction or new features. And so we were able to kind of show what the historical trend has been, kind of where we are now, and where the program is sort of positioned, at least at this point in time, to help them understand the impact of any potential investment in other corridors or new construction projects. So just a quick flavor of some of the things that we have done to try to paint the picture. A couple of things that we've had as outcomes of this. In our 2018 program, our leadership recommended to the Commission an enhanced investment for pavement and bridge stewardship. We have been successful in getting that into the draft program, which will be approved in June, hopefully. And we've seen some modest but significant increases for pavement investments, and almost a doubling, at least in the out years, for the bridge investment. So that's a very positive outcome. I think they really took to heart some of this information and really saw it in a way that maybe we hadn't showed it to them before. The other thing that we really worked through was trying to make sure that staff were comfortable with these numbers. We all know that these models are just models. They're not perfect. They have flaws, and we want to keep improving them, but we can't really wait for the perfect information before we act, or we'll be sitting here forever. We need to put some information out there that we think has some merit, and hopefully be able to confirm the analysis, or at least find that we're in the ballpark as we continue to refine our analyses in the future. And so, we want in the future to look even more in detail at how we can make this message consistent. How can we have you might have noticed that the bridge charts and the pavement charts look really different. Well, I think one of the things we want to do in the future is try to figure out how can we get those teams working together sooner so that we can have more consistency in the presentation and try to make things look better and more consistent to our stakeholders. So those are some lessons learned here from Iowa, and look forward to any questions that you might have at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Our next presentation today is from Chris Dizot. Chris is the TAMP project manager in the Maryland Department of Transportation, State Highway Administration, Innovative Planning and Performance Division. Chris has worked at SHA for 16 years, the last 3 managing the coordination of asset management activities. Now I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Shauna. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Matt. And we'll take a look at Maryland's TAMP development process here, and I'll just start off taking a moment to discuss the context for the presentation today. Since I'm from the planning office, my presentation is going to talk a little bit more about the coordination challenges. In Maryland, we chose to develop our TAMP to include only bridge and pavements as required on the NHS. And we do have asset management approaches for other assets, but in order to really dig in and understand the processes required, we just thought we'd limit our first version to those 2 assets. But we do understand, because of NBI inspection and HPMS middles, that bridges and pavements are most likely the 2 most mature assets managed for any state. In Maryland here, we do have 2 of our own ARAN vehicles for collection of pavement distress data, as well as a skid vehicle for friction, and we do have video log and field data collection activities using geospatially enabled devices. So we do have a whole lot going on, but for this TAMP development process, we're just going to concentrate on the pavements and the bridges. And then we really wanted to take a look at how these processes all link together to paint the overall picture, and how those links should be made statewide, which is very important here because we have to take a look at this regardless of ownership. And so we'll take a look at what we have here in Maryland. Maryland's not a very large state, but we'll just take a quick look at it. We have 23 counties plus Baltimore City. Baltimore City is an independent jurisdiction. We kind of call ourselves sometimes American miniature. We have beaches on the East Coast, and we have mountains, well, 3,300 foot high mountains, so maybe it's not a mountain to some people, but we do have that. And we have the I-95 corridor running right through the middle of it. We have about 6 million people in Maryland, but about 10 plus million in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore metropolitan area. We do have a deep water port that can accommodate the larger ships from the new Panama Canal. And we do see every weather condition here, from blizzards and hurricanes to heat and cold, and that really affects our conditions and maintaining them. And we have about 3,000 miles of coastline, so we have a lot of flooding and inundation and those types of things, which also affect our assets and really how we look at them long term. So we really do see a lot of challenges with maintaining the condition of our pavements and bridges. Just a quick look at our departmental organization here. I think we're unique in our structure here. We do have, underneath this Maryland Department of the Transportation umbrella, it's all under a single leadership, and underneath that we have the Transit Administration, we have our Motor Vehicle Administration, we have our Port Administration, we have the Aviation Administration, of course we have ourselves the State Highway Administration, and we have the Maryland Transportation Authority. The Maryland Transportation Authority handles all of our toll facilities. So, I-95, for instance, in the north side is Toll Authority, and on the south side is State Highway Administration. So there's a certain level of coordination that needs to go on just within our own department. We have about 70,000 lane miles of roadway, 5,000 bridges, 2 tunnels, about 58 billion vehicle miles each year. And SHA here, where I work, is responsible for operating and maintaining about 25% of Maryland's lane miles, about 50% of its bridges, and about 68% of its vehicle miles traveled are on our facilities. Again, we also have the Transportation Authority. They also own NHS pavements and bridges, but they receive their funding through toll revenue and not through federal funding or through state gas tax and things like that. But the nice thing about this is we have the basic structure to support the integration of processes associated with asset management, all in one place. And then more internal to SHA, it's important to note that our Office of Structures and our Pavement Office, which we call Materials Technology, they also have 2 different kind of structures here, which makes it even more interesting, the coordination process. Our bridge office is really centralized, and they handle just about everything except for some minor maintenance activities, while our pavement approach is decentralized, with our materials office having all the condition data, construction history data, optimization tools, and our district staff actually implements the construction programs that are come up with, and they have the flexibility to make the decisions based on field experience in their specific areas. So they communicate any changes, and it's an iterative process. Here we do have an asset management steering committee, and it's made up of our senior leadership up top. We have an administrator and 3 deputy administrators, and so they set the overall vision. The steering committee is made up of about 10 senior managers throughout SHA. It's representative in nature, so they kind of take their directorship hats off and look at it from an SHA perspective, and they do things like set goals and objectives and develop and improve policies and really make sure that everything's moving along where it's supposed to. And then we have work groups underneath them that are made up of the subject matter experts. The work group to put this TAMP together, data collection and policy and data governance are some of the types of things that we look at through that structure. Getting started here with the TAMP. Again, it was important to talk about who our project stakeholders are internally and externally. We have a lot of different owners here of NHS assets, so this will just give you a quick look at the coordination challenges just within our own area. So in the Department of Transportation alone, again, we had to coordinate with the Toll Authority, and we also had to look at the Maryland Aviation Administration. And internally within just SHA alone, where I work, we had to coordinate with the Office of Structures, again, the bridges, our Office of Materials Technology, which is pavements, finance, maintenance, planning, our program division, and data services engineering division within planning, our highway development, policy and research, traffic and safety. We have 7 district offices around the state, our chief engineer, our Office of Information Technology, and the administrator's office. And so asset management involves so many different areas and people. And just within MDOT, we also coordinated with the Secretary's Office of Planning, Capital Programming, and the different areas within MDTA. Again, that's our authority. And they have multiple offices that we had to coordinate with. And then on top of that, the metropolitan planning organizations, as we know, they have parallel requirements to meet national performance goal areas. So it was important to engage with them at the beginning of this process so we all know what each other was doing, how they were doing it, and different types of data that we can share and try and create efficiencies. So here our regional MPO coverage of the 23 counties and Baltimore cities through 7 different MPOs. So that was just a challenge just to identify the people to even talk to get on board. So we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth about how we're currently doing and the start of the discussion on where we wanted to go. We started that with keeping in mind that this was all happening before the proposed rules were even finalized. So we knew that there was going to be a lot of things that we didn't know, even as far as the pavement data requirements, the pavement condition requirement changes, bridge, and not to mention just the TAMP process itself. So there's a whole lot of unknowns going into this. So what we did right after we started the kickoff meeting for the TAMP, we partnered with the Federal Highway Administration on a very vigorous gap analysis process of our bridges, pavements, and related maintenance areas. And this was kind of outside of this TAMP development process, but is very thorough. They started out by looking at all of the relevant agency asset management practices, our long-range plans, the STIP, any pavement, bridge, or maintenance analyses, and financial reports, interviewed key officials. We did a self-assessment. We did real-time self-assessment and also post-assessment interviews. We came up with a draft implementation plan with a lot of recommendations, and the final product was really a great look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what we wanted to be doing, and the different ways to try and get there. And this really set the stage for us to begin the TAMP development process because we really had a good hold on all the information that was going to be required to build on, to make links to, and how to discuss these different things. And then also to take a look at, well, is this really what we kind of want to do? And different ways on how to get to where we actually wanted to go. So this was a really interesting process, got about a 35-page document out of it. And so, well, let's take a look at who owns what. And, the coordination of the project really here is the meat of here. The Metropolitan MPOs, again, they have 7 of them around here over top of our different counties. So some of the owners of our NHS assets are SHA, that's us, our Toll Authority, the Aviation Administration, all 23 counties, Baltimore City, other numerous municipalities. The National Park Service actually owns a few miles of NHS, as well as the Department of Defense and the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's kind of the whole universe there. And just to talk about actually the share, what we have here, we have 5,300 bridges in Maryland, and 2,500 of them are state-owned. And of those 2,500 bridges, 1,900 of them are located on the NHS. Now, 1,500 of those are state highway administrations. About 278 are the Maryland toll authorities. The Maryland Aviation Administration has one. And then 109 are in Baltimore City, and then about 30 are owned by 4 different counties. So luckily there were a few counties that didn't own NHS bridges that we had to do a full outreach to, so that did help. But as far as Maryland pavements, we have about 70,000 lane miles of roadway, and about 9,800 miles of those are NHS. We own about 82% of that. MDTA, or toll authority, owns about 5% of that. So the state owns and maintains about 87% of the NHS pavements, and the Baltimore City is the next largest owner with about 5%. So we knew who the major players were, but we really wanted to do our outreach and communication coordination with all of the MPOs so we could communicate these new best practices that were coming out so they could use them on other roads, not necessarily NHS roads, but to also try and coordinate what data other places had that we could use and what other types of data that we had that they could use. So this was really a very interesting part of the process. So understanding some of the condition here, for bridges, according to the 2015 data, which is what we kind of started with, the 2016 data submittals just happened, so we're going to start working on analyzing those to see where we're at. For NHS bridges, about 31% of state-owned bridges are in good condition, 67% are in fair condition, and 1.2% are in poor condition. On the NHS system that the State Highway Administration owns, we have less than 70 structurally deficient bridges. We've done a whole lot of investment recently to make sure those go down. You can see the slide on there. The money is the green line, and the structurally deficient bridges is the blue line. And we do bridge inspection elements and inventory data are managed using InspecTech, and it includes inspection data from us, all of Maryland's counties, Baltimore City, and the other state agencies, and it was recently updated to comply with the new NBA information required by MAP 21. And data collection on newly required elements is already underway. We're responsible for reporting all the data and managing inspection for local bridge owners and assisting them through the federal aid process and reviewing plans for projects conducted with federal funding. And different owners, such as Baltimore City and the local authorities, maintain their own bridges and conduct their own project prioritization projects. But we still collect all their MDI data submissions. For payments, we use RoadCare to maintain pavement inventory and condition data and to predict pavement conditions and help recommend pavement work. We use automated data collection, like I said, using the ARAN. And we do all the HPMS submittals on additional stresses not reported in the HPMS. We also do all N.SHA owned payments and that management system on and off the NHS. So we have everything in there. And again, we have that truck that collects all the rutting and cracking and ride quality information. That information, along with budgets and constraints, are fed into the optimization system in RoadCare, and that kind of helps us plan out what our program is going to be on an annual basis. We do have a consolidated transportation plan, and that looks out 6 years, but really in reality, in the out years, we don't fully plan those out the same way we do the initial years. So here at SHA, we do use remaining service life as our measure. Our pavements are in good condition based on the evaluation use ride quality, friction, rutting, structural cracking, and functional cracking as parameters. And on average, we have about 17 years of overall remaining service life using 2015 data out of a possible 50, with about 10% of that pavement network having 0 years of remaining service life. We evaluate by functional class, and the rural pavements are in better condition than urban ones. I think everyone could probably appreciate that. And as far as data collection, again, we have our own ARAN, and then we use the RoadCare system for that. For the TAMP development process, we did use 5 workshops to get everyone together to have these discussions. We had about 30 people come to all of our workshops, and they're split out like this: bridge, pavement, objectives and measures, risk assessment, management, financial planning, and investment strategies. But since this webinar is about inventory, condition target set, and financial projections, I won't be getting into much detail about some of them, but focusing in on the bridges and pavements and then supporting the decisions made in those workshops with the objectives and measures and investment workshops allowed for incremental understanding of where we wanted to go. Take a look at the bridge and pavement workshops here. So the basic premise of both of these workshops was to talk about where what we're currently doing. How does that differ from what we believe the final rules will require? Again, we started before those were finalized, and I guess technically they're not there yet. But what information does our current data provide us, and what assumptions do we want to make in order to develop appropriate targets? Since we had started coordinating with external partners early in the process, we were all able to have a broader context for where we wanted to go with regard to inventory, condition assessments, and other required information. And what were some of the items where we needed to improve, such as coordinating with the local agencies, MPO data collection requirements captured planned work. We needed to get more understanding of what they were planning to do so we could help use our experience to offer advice and everything like that, and find out again where there might be efficiencies, where we have something already set up where we could just plug in certain data and run queries for them, and maybe optimization as well sometime in the future. And as well, risk management, what are actual versus our optimal treatment selections, and 10-year analysis horizon, really inflation and simulation of additional distresses and impacts to performance expectations were important to understand. The cracking, I think, is the big one that is coming out that has changed the most throughout the NPRM process. And I think most states, from what I understand, have, maybe don't have the most strong understanding and modeling capabilities for cracking. Look at some of the other workshops that we did here, the objectives and measures, risk assessment, and financial planning. So for the objectives and measures, we developed a mission statement, and we determined the highest priority asset management objectives, and we determined the performance measures that supported those objectives, and then we talked about the relationship between the actual TAMP and our vision. And for the risk assessment, we took a look at providing the opportunity for subject matter experts to share with each other the key risks to achieving asset management objectives. For instance, we found out that our central office and our district offices, they needed to have a little tighter, more formalized conversation to talk about some of the things that were being seen in the field and what were being analyzed within the central office. So that was kind of a really cool thing to see, that everyone was starting to come together and have a greater understanding. They all do a great job, but we can always find places for improvement, and we're working towards that. For the financial planning investment strategies, we want to develop an understanding of the difference between the budget and the financial plan. So we want to tie those all together in the TAM. So just take a quick look at some of the financial planning investment strategies. We did look at 3 different types of scenarios, and we were introduced to using the Delphi method, which was very interesting. So we looked at funding that is estimated to be reasonable, available, required to achieve targets, and funding required to maintain asset value. So we went through there, and for bridges, the basic target is to maintain the current conditions. Again, we've done a lot of investment to get those structurally deficient bridges under control, and so we found out that over the 6 and 10 years, we're not investing what we need to in order to maintain the current condition. We also found out the same for pavements. And so that was a very interesting conversation and allows us to really think more forwardly about how to make those and maintain those investments. Talk about our next steps that we came out with. And well, first, to complete the federally required TAMP here, but also to develop and build out statewide enhancements to improve upon what we do, such as data collection and storage. We're getting into mobile LiDAR to build out our inventory and to partner with all the stakeholders to increase efficiencies. We're developing plans and processes to collect data from connected and automated vehicles, and we're identifying how many different ways we can use the same inventory. For analysis tools, we're looking at approaches to help share and analyze the data. We have an asset data warehouse that we're building into another generation right now. We're also migrating to Esri roads and highways. We're also doing developing new policies such as e-construction, which Matt had mentioned before, and different partnership and resource sharing opportunities such as data collection, optimization, and different things like that. So we know here's the timeline here, and we still have a lot to improve on, but telling our story about where we are now and where we want to go has been invaluable. Once the final version is certified by the Federal Highway Administration and these documents are officially available to the public, they'll be better opportunities to engage all stakeholders in a more transparent way. We're here to take good care of probably the most expensive assets in any state, and we really want everyone to know what a great job we're doing, and that we're always looking for ways to improve. And some of the ways that we're looking to communicate that is through an asset management dashboard that shows our bridges and pavements, the current conditions, and the different projects that we have coming up to address deficient conditions. And also, again, our asset data warehouse, which is geospatially enabled, and now you can look at where the assets are in relation to all the other assets and do queries on different inspection and data data condition information. So we're looking to improve every day, and this process of going through the TAMP development has really gotten us there. So again, thank you very much, and any other questions I look forward to trying to answer at the end of this.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, our next presentation is from Mike Johnson with the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans. Mike is the State Asset Management Engineer for Caltrans, responsible for statewide asset management implementation and management of over $2 billion in annual transportation investments. Mike has been actively involved in the areas of asset management, bridge inspection and management, bridge management, and infrastructure preservation throughout his 25-plus years with Caltrans. Mike also serves on the Federal Highway TAM Expert Task Group. Now I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Shauna. I'll give a quick overview of what Caltrans has been doing with asset inventory, condition, and target setting. And I guess I'm going to focus in on some of the challenges that we have and where we've overcome those challenges. Try to highlight those in hopes that maybe it can help some of those on the webinar today. First, kind of a high-level roadmap of where we are in our TAMP development process. So the big red bar there is kind of where we've been. So we've passed the scope and the inventory and asset condition, which is really the focus of this webinar. But we've actually gone a little bit further into performance forecasting and looking at some of our goals and objectives from a statewide perspective, and then just recently completed our risk management workshop, and we're now planning our financial plan and investment strategy workshop for next month. But our goal is, and we're working through it here, is to get our TAMP by the April 2018 deadline. A little bit about the system in California. We have a pretty comprehensive transportation system, and this just shows you a piece of it. This is kind of in the area where I work. The red state highways there are showing you the national highway system portion. Those that are white are state highways that are not part of the national highway system. And the blue portion are the national highway system owned by local agencies. And in California, we have over 650 local entities that own transportation components, which makes coordinating some of the local aspects of the TAMP very difficult. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Another thing that's somewhat unique in California is that we have both a federal law, MAP 21 and FAST, that cover pavement and bridges for state and local NHS, but we also have a state law, and the state law covers all of the non-NHS state assets and extends beyond pavements and bridges to include culverts and ITS elements initially, with the promise that the asset classes will expand beyond the 4 that are shown there. As far as the inventory goes, California does, or Caltrans does, most of the bridge inspections for the state and local agencies in California. There are a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, Caltrans has all of the bridge inventory and bridge condition information either collected directly from our staff or collected from a local entity that might be doing their own inspection. For pavement, Caltrans is using automated pavement condition survey vans. We have begun collecting the entire NHS, and we're doing that on an annual basis. So we don't really have a data problem per se, in that we know where the pavement and where the bridges are. Under the state law provisions, we're still building our culvert inventory. That's an area that's growing. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 115,000 culverts that have been inventoried so far, and we estimate that we have about 205 total. When we look at the NHS in terms of centerline miles, we have about almost 14,000 centerline miles. Caltrans owns 63% of those centerline miles, and we have about almost 11,000 bridges, and Caltrans owns or is responsible for 86% of those. When we look at those same metrics in terms of the MAP 21 criteria, when we look at the NHS, we'll see that we have about almost a little over 51,000 lane miles. Caltrans has responsibility for 74% of all the NHS lane miles in California, and we have responsibility for about 90% of all the bridge deck area on the NHS. So that's about 224 million square feet of bridge deck area. So it's a little misleading when you look by count and then you start looking by area. We, as the State Department of Transportation, have the lion's share of both. And but on the pavement side, I'd say the local owners are a significant player. On the bridge side, a little bit less. In terms of where we are with the inventory, we put checks in most of these boxes with an X in the culvert because we're still building that. For the culverts we have inventoried, we obviously know the condition of those, but we're doing pretty well in inventory and condition. Not so well in life cycle policy. We're still working on what those policies are and really formulating them. I think we have the policies. They've been in practice for many years. It's just a matter of actually writing those policies out and getting buy-off on them. In terms of predictive models, we in California use an agile pavement management system, and we use AASHTO BRM for our bridge management system. Culverts has a little homegrown system that we use that has some basic deterioration modeling built in that's largely based on research rather than measured condition over time. And then for our traffic management system elements, we also have a homegrown system with predictive models based on expected service lives of different ITS elements. As far as spending, we have a very good handle on the spending that Caltrans has in total. What we are not so good about is understanding how much of that spending is related to the national highway system and how much is related to the rest of the system. In fact, we don't track spending by NHS versus non-NHS at all. And so for our financial plan, we're looking to prorate based on the areas of pavement and or bridges to determine what the appropriate NHS or what we think the NHS funding is. On the local side, the picture is a lot more complicated. For pavement, a lot of our locals use Street Saver, and they have their own models. Some have other systems other than Street Saver. For bridge, most of them don't have a bridge management system. Some use some components of BRM. The current spending is really complicated because we have hundreds of agencies that are spending money on the NHS. The funding that they get comes from, in some cases, federal sources and or state sources, which Caltrans is aware of and can put into our TAMP. But many of our local agencies also have their own sales tax. They have local bond money. They have local developer fee money. They have other sources of funds that could be contributing to the preservation of the infrastructure on the NHS. And trying to understand the magnitude of that is very much a challenge for us, given the large number of agencies and generally the reluctance of those agencies to really share a whole lot about what they're spending. Most of the local agencies don't even recognize the NHS as a separate subset of the system that they're managing as a whole. So we have some challenges here on the local side. We've got some workshops scheduled to look at the investment plan and really to bring our locals in to try to get information or ideas from them on how we can get a better handle on the funding that's available and you know what that might be in terms, what that might mean in terms of an investment plan. I think at this point we're proposing to use, at least as a starting point, the Caltrans predictive models for pavements and bridges and culverts, and extrapolate that onto the NHS, and then present that as a starting point when we bring all of our local partners together to see is that resonating with them in terms of what they believe is happening for the portions of the system that they own. We talked about our pavement management system. It's agile. We are doing a lot of pavement data collection. Each lane for the state highway system in both directions annually. So we have lots and lots and lots of pavement data. We're doing collecting cracking, rutting, faulting, and IRI as our distress measures, if you will. We have a historic condition assessment protocol that Caltrans has used, and we're just starting to get accustomed to the good, fair, poor for pavement conditions. That has led to an added complexity when we go to talk to the locals who primarily use Street Saver, and they don't, there's no feeling either historically from the Caltrans side or from the local side in terms of, what is a good number, what is a good poor number, and by elimination, what's a good fair number. We do have projections for deterioration that come out of our pavement management system, and we've utilized that for our 10-year needs analysis in what we call our State Highway Operation and Protection Program, or SHOP. The latest SHOP, our 2017 SHOP plan needs assessment, was done in a performance management approach. So we've fully implemented the performance management requirements of MAP 21. In terms of bridge conditions, they deteriorate more slowly, and a lot of what the condition is, that we could predict in a 10-year window is based on where we are today and what kind of projects we have planned to be delivered in the coming years. We do have deterioration models, and we also develop statistical models to look at what the average transition rates are, deterioration rates between good and fair and poor conditions as we move into this MAP 21 world. And again, the bridge assets were also fully implemented in our latest 10-year plan using a performance management approach. As far as predicting future conditions for the non-Caltrans NHS payments, this is much more difficult. I mentioned we were collecting the APS data. We submitted samples of that data to the federal government in HPMS, and we've subsequently been working with Max Grog and the Federal Highway Office of Asset Management on some tools that they've been helping to develop that will look at that HPMS data and give us some breakdowns so that we can help better communicate to our locals what the condition of their pavement is for non-NHS, non-Caltrans pavement. It gets very complicated because we're looking at ownership and also system. We're going to look at different approaches. I think our initial shot will be extrapolate results from what Caltrans did. We're also going to be working with some of our larger MPOs and some of the work that they've done to see if we have consistency in deterioration between the state and local NHS system. As far as our investment work, we're looking at using HERS ST for our TAMP. In terms of bridges, again, data is not the issue here. Our initial methodology will be to use the approaches that the deterioration models and things that we use on the state system. We're also going to look at N-bias as a possible solution for the local bridge analysis. Just a quick glimpse of what we did for target setting. Although we haven't done the target setting for the NHS, we were required under state law to do it for the state highway system, and we developed curves like this that would help us communicate to our Transportation Commission who has the authority to approve the targets. And basically what this is looking at our state highway system bridges, and it's a performance cost graph, and each of these concentric curves represents a different percent of poor bridges. So we don't have that many poor, so we can represent them by different curves, but I didn't want to lose sight of the preservation of the bridges or the preservation of any of our physical assets for that matter. And so a lot of our focus is on fair condition, and what you see in the x-axis here is the fair condition. So our existing condition was about 21% of the deck area was considered fair by federal criteria, and we looked at various targets to the left of fair, and we could basically pick a concentric curve for what poor percentage you wanted to accept as your as the condition you could afford, and then you can see the cost in billions of dollars on the vertical axis on the left. And so we could very quickly communicate that, you know, if we want to move fair, say to 10%, then we're gonna increase our annual expenditure approximately $4 billion a year. And so a tool like this was very effective in communicating the options in terms of performance and cost. So in summary, Caltrans is performing all of the NHS data collection for pavements and bridges. We're currently about 60% complete with our culvert work. We have both federal and state asset management requirements, and that means we have to satisfy the federal government as well as our California Transportation Commission with our plan. We have most of our challenges are dealing with the local assets, deterioration rates, funding levels, and other things where there just isn't a lot of good quality information, and just the basic absence of a recognition of what the NHS is from the local side. And then from a target setting standpoint, nobody's really that comfortable with the new measures. We don't have historical trend information, and it makes target setting very difficult. So we're doing curves and we're making our best guess at things. But I think once we get a little bit of history of these measures under our belt, I think we'll be in a better position to improve target setting going forward. And certainly I think the experience that we had on the state highway system target setting will help as we move to the NHS and start broadening that discussion out with our local partners. So that's kind of a quick summary of where we are in California.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, our next presentation is from Mick Sislow of the Nebraska Department of Roads. Mick has worked for Nebraska DOR since 1994, the first 10 years in the Roadway Design Division, and for the past 13 years, he's been in the Material and Research Division, where he was a pavement design engineer for the state, and now he's the Material and Research Division head engineer, where the TAMP is being developed. So let me turn it over to Mick. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yep. Before you get started, Mick, if you can go up to display settings at the top and flip-flop the display. There, you got it. Thanks.
You bet. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, well, for the purpose of this presentation, you'll see me reference the Department of Roads, which we still are for a few more months, but maybe you'll heard that we're going to join the club and become a DOT. So I just want to point that out as we move forward. As we developed our TAMP, obviously we had some focus that we were trying to maintain, and that was with what the rule and requirements were, just like everybody else. As we did focus on the gap, the life cycle, the risk, and the financial plans and our investment strategies, we really came into
Nick, sorry to break in again. The audio's coming through a little garbled. Perhaps if you could just speak a little louder and maybe a little closer to the microphone, it might cut down on the distortion. Thanks.
Sure, thank you very much. Can you hear me a little better now?
It is slightly distorted still, so but I bet you that if you speak loud as you can, it'll be sufficiently clear.
Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me now. I'm trying different speakers here to see if that helps improve.
Oh, that's better.
Okay. All right. So when we began developing the TAMP, obviously we were looking to develop a single document that overarched on how we did business, and we really wanted to tie into the TAMP, not to change necessarily how we did business, but to really just explain what we do today and make sure obviously we're meeting the requirements. The expectation for us was to make sure that we are reporting on the bridge and the pavements, and that we must be resilient enough to handle risk, incidents, fundings, and needs of the future, and then also local NHS coordination. For us, when we began looking at this several years ago, we had already developed a management plan for all of our what we were considering our major assets at the time. The development of the TAMP, we really pulled out of that assessment bridges and pavements. So we utilized this foundation to move forward with that in our planning. For us, we also have a strong focus on looking forward, and so we have what we call a 2032 horizon plan, which really is really robust plan for us to focus on what areas we're going to invest into, and then we have a strong focus on goals and achievements as kind of developed through our governor and down on through our director of what we feel our goals and performance of the department should be. To do that, then, well, I guess we'll start with our pavements. With our pavements, we're collecting every year, and we have our own pathway bands that we collect the data. We collect two forms of data there, as maybe you're all familiar with the data, such as the rating, faulting, and IRI. We also have visual ratings in which we get out and manually stop every tenth of a mile to get our visual ratings for the pavements. We're in the process of upgrading to an automatic crack detection to make that more of an automated cracking and severity index, and therefore to hopefully make this whole data collection automated in the near future. I point to this because this is really right in line with when we look at our 10-year projection models. We utilize this data that we collect every year because it's our largest asset. We utilize the pavement data to distribute our funding throughout our 8 districts throughout the state. So based on lane miles and condition of the pavements, that dictates the percent of the funding that each district gets. And to do that, we use a 10-year model, which we've used for the last 15, 20 years, in which we determine or establish a pavement condition in which we want the pavement to be within those 10 years, and then we run the model forward to say what kind of funding would be required to get it to that index. And that is basically how we distribute our funds throughout the state. As part of our management, we did risk really is, I know wasn't a major topic today, but it's incorporated and in line with how we actually select our projects and programs. So I'm just going to touch base on it a little bit. We utilize with our program. We started with the NCHRP that was developed back in 2012, which moved from worst first to more of an at-risk type of a scenario. And so for our pavements, when we go through and we select what we want for our risk, we have components that we look at to help us make the proper selection as we move forward. When you fill those in, we start looking at allow lower maybe conditions on less traveled routes. We look at hazards to determine, floodplains and such. Impact of the strategies, the difference between a major reconstruction project to a crack seal project versus a small project versus a large, say, bridge project. Those kind of things come into play as far as when we're looking at the consequences of the strategies. And as we move down the decision tree, we try to do it the right time into the action, and then we prioritize by a benefit cost ratio and add that risk factor in, which I'll just briefly show on in a second. So this is the decision tree we have. Basically, as we move down, the model determines how we select our pavement selection criteria. This was a homegrown program that we developed with our university several years ago, and we utilize it and update it every so often to make sure that our deterioration model and our decision tree fall in line with what we're seeing for performance out on the road. Going through that model, we develop what we call a benefit cost ratio, and then we put into our risk system, our risk component, which would be the system factor. That's whether it's an interstate or a local road. Obviously, the interstate would have a higher risk factor to it. A density factor. We have a population density factor that we utilize to determine the risk of not doing the project or doing the project. We have a strategy factor, like we described, whether that was full replacement, major concrete, major bridge work, those kind of things versus a minor work, and then the length of the project, a small localized issue versus a very large segment. And that helps us select our projects as we move forward. When we go to the Nebraska bridge side of it, like everybody else, we have a robust MBI system that we use for our inventory that includes all the element selection data, our inventory data, including photos. We utilize real cost, which is our life cycle analysis that we utilize to determine categories of bridges and category of strategies to fix those, which gives us the ability to do programmatic and problematic solutions predicting forward. And this is just a kind of a funding scenario given the conditions that we want the bridges to be in. These are just kind of glimpses of the data that we can utilize with our system. We can also utilize the system to backwards trends and forwards trends of where we're at, to utilize that to help us make our decisions and to set our criteria. And then we also can come in here and based on the new condition ratings. Now, how we all tie this together, we have state laws that require us to report out this information and have for quite some time, that we have to report annually our performance measures and other things. And this happens to be our annual report that we kick out every year, which has one component of that is all of our performance measures, but one component is our asset management. What we've done with our TAMP, and we've developed one document that we've decided to make a live document on the web, which would share links to these kind of documents that we already do, and so that we're not having to update the TAMP regularly on an every 6 months or yearly basis, but that basically the TAMP can give a nice summary of every category and then have hot links that basically come to these other documents that we update on a regular basis so that we can establish our measures and our reporting. I believe it's safe to say for us, we're kind of like the other states in which we're targeting more or less the condition that we have right now for both pavements and bridges. We've back calculated in and established the new good, fair, and poor conditions into our pavement range, so we've tweaked these reports to reflect the federal requirements, and then we've backed that in to make sure that our trends show what, if these conditions and these ratings were used 5 years ago, we could get a good handle on where our pavements have been given the current conditions or given the current rating system. And so this is really our asset management reporting tool that we're going to utilize through the web. We also have a state requirement that requires us to publish a transportation book for a 1- and 5-year program. That gives us our short-term and predictive needs. We use that too to check against our predictive models of what's being programmed and what our programs or softwares are telling us we should be programming. We also do that 2016 needs assessment is a 20-year analysis in which that we define all of our needs from bridges to pavement needs from 3R type work all the way to geometric type work, and so that we can continue to define where our needs will grow. Obviously, there's always a gap between our needs and our funding, but we always track it to show that there is a constant need out there. I'll just briefly touch on risk, even though I know it's not part of this, but the risk component for our what we're trying to tie into is emergency type development, where we can do for emergency type responses, incident reporting, and also then maintaining our roadways. We have links within our program that would follow and go to these documents and then go to these like 511 links. We also think that financial can be a risk. We've established programs that help us develop when we do those 10-year analysis. What money do we spend where first? And in this case, asset preservation is one of our top priorities, and then we have a mechanism to fund other pots as we move forward. We also have a component then that helps us handle if more money comes in, less money comes in, overrun, underrun, premature failures, those kind of things that we can still evaluate in our programming. I was trying to get through this a little fast, maybe a little faster than I wanted to. I apologize, but for us, that's just a brief overview of what we're trying to do is to define the two assets, which is the National Highway System as a whole. We have roughly 10,000 miles of center lane miles in the state, of which about 3,600 are National Highway System. Only about 5% of that is managed by the locals. So for us, the assets and how we manage them is really going to be, for us as the department, we currently track and maintain that for them now, and we will continue to do that in the future. So they're going to follow suit with us. We have coordination workshops scheduled this summer to begin answering more of their questions as we move forward, but the department will be taking that for them. The focus and the planning that we talked about with our programs really, we believe, has been in place. It's just a matter of documenting it and tying it together. And then our reporting tools, we're trying to utilize what we already report through and just kind of more put a federal twist to it so that we meet the requirements, still meet both the state and federal requirements, and tie our needs and our risk assessment with that. I know it's really brief and high level, but I just kind of want to let you know where we're at. We have a draft report that we're trying to finalize with the tweaks. Our next step, like I said, is to coordinate that draft with the locals and to begin developing our webpage. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Mick. All right, that concludes our presentations for today. Thank you to all of our presenters. Now it's time for the Q&A. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A feature of the webinar toolbar. So I'm now going to just take them in the order that we received the questions. So the first question is, are you modeling for bridge deck area as well as count of bridges? I think this was directed first at Iowa DOT, but I think if all of you could answer it, I think that would benefit everyone. So I think, Peggy, you're on for Matt Habra?
Yes. Can you repeat the question, please?
Are you modeling for bridge deck area as well as just the bridge count in your bridge performance projection?
Yes. I don't know a lot of the details, but I know when we presented to the commission, we did it in both scenarios. So we gave them information about the bridge deck area and its condition, just like we did with the number of bridges.
Great, thanks. How about you, Chris? Chris, you might be on mute. All right, Mike?
Sorry. Yes, I was on mute. Yes, we are doing that as well. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Yes, we're modeling for bridge deck area as well.
Okay, Mike?
California is doing modeling bridge deck area.
All right, and Mick?
Yes, we do both.
All right. The next question is directed to Iowa. On slide number 14, you presented delayed investment. One of the things we struggle with in asset management is the cost of deferred maintenance. Did you guys consider the trade-off in life cycle cost and performance between the two scenarios of consistent investment and late investment? Peggy?
Yes, I'm here. I'm not sure I know how to answer the question. I don't think I really want you to have to repeat the whole thing again. So maybe you could just send me the question.
Yeah, I think what we can do is send you guys the questions, and we can post it along at the end of the slide deck.
Yeah, that would be great. We do have slides, I'm sure, that we can send to answer the question.
Okay, all right, no problem. All right, this is a question to all the speakers. How are you accounting for data uncertainty or variability in your target setting activities? Are you including a data confidence level in your TAMP? Who wants to go first?
I can talk about that a little bit. I know that we have looked at those scenarios, we have modeled that, but I don't believe that we have actually put those scenarios into the TAMP. We've just looked at them ourselves to see what would happen if you have some kind of confidence level in your information.
I'll say for Maryland, to say what she said too, we're not necessarily including that in the TAMP, but since we do collect data for the entire NHS, we do know what current conditions are, but without construction history or planned treatments in the future, we can't model those for the locals. The same is for Bridge as well.
Mike?
Well, certainly we consider it, and it comes in many forms. We don't develop a formal confidence level, no.
Mick?
We don't really have a formal confidence level either. I mean, obviously we have a quality assurance program for our data, but then we also, and using the models we have, they do have a problematic type of analysis to them. So that does in itself give a percentage of accuracy, but as far as to actually have a confidence level, we don't.
Mick, a question for you. When are you going to have the web-based TAMP available, and is it going to be available publicly?
Yeah, right now we have an electronic version that we're developing, and we've presented an overview with Federal Highway, and so our intent is then we're developing our schedule to finalize our financial side of things and the risk components, and then with that, then we may go back and at that point look at the gaps. So over the next 6 to 8 months is our plan to kind of get that kind of nailed down, and then development of putting it out on the web as a live document with live links, and yes, we're planning on putting it as part of our website.
Great.
So
thanks.
Early next year maybe.
Okay, thanks, Mick. So this is a question for all of you. What have you done so far regarding the asset present value? Who wants to take that first?
Well, for California, when we do our 10-year planning, we calculate the estimated replacement cost of all the assets. In terms of the valuation of them in their current condition, we have used condition-based discounting in the past, although we didn't do that most recently.
Anybody else?
Yeah, here in Maryland, for Federal Highway purposes, we do use the GASB 34 approach, and that's based on the minimum rating for bridges for deck superstructure and substructure on the existing bridges. So we basically took the replacement cost in square footage, and then we kind of understand that the remaining service life is a linear reduction, and the minimum rating drops from 9 to a 3. So we just kind of took that approach. The same with pavements as well. We know the basic reconstruction for pavement per square foot, and so we know the deterioration curve and just applied it in that way.
How about Iowa or Nebraska?
Yeah, here in Nebraska, we use the replacement cost as well, but it's defined as through our state audits. So as we define that cost associated with that to replace, that is what we basically use for assessment of the value.
We don't do a lot of that, no.
Okay. Thank you. And then our final question. So So how many of you have actually used the federal performance measures on your NHS to do your target setting and 10-year projections?
California used some.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, in California, we use the federal good, fair, poor metrics and set targets for both fair and poor condition.
You say in Maryland, we have not yet applied those. We're going to take a few months here over the summer since the HPMS submittals are finalized now for last year and put those parameters into place.
Yeah, here in Nebraska, we have changed ours as far as our reporting to match the federal good, fair, poor, and then we back that in to show the history of it. But we don't treat our NHS any different than the rest of our system. We treat the system as a whole.
Yeah.
In Iowa, we have not started using those measures.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I think that we'll move on to the final slide in our webinar. The next webinar will be held on July 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It's the second of this 4-part series addressing elements of a transportation asset management plan. And the topic will be focused on risk management. I hope you'll be able to join us. Additional webinars will be continuing for a while, scheduled every 2 months. And please send any ideas for webinars you'd like to see. I think the next round after this may be decided at the TAM ASHTO meeting, which will happen in a couple of weeks in Portland, Maine, or this summer in Cleveland at the joint meetings of many of the committees. All right, so just as a final reminder, for more information, visit tam-portal.com. Thanks to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of the participants listening today. Goodbye. Have a good day.